The longsword has always remained one of the most popular weapons ever introduced in the Monster Hunter series. Not only is this thing easy to pick up for beginner players, but this weapon also has an insanely high skill ceiling for expert players. If you're new to the channel or not subscribed, yo, what's up? I'm Tara. I'm a Monster Hunter veteran who's played the series for 20 years, but I'm also a weapons expert as I play every single weapon in the Monster Hunter series. The longsword has some of the longest reaching attacks in Monster Hunter, but not only this weapon retains a ton of speed through its attacks. And yeah, the longsword can't block, but who needs blocking when you can counter monsters' attacks, further lending to your own damage? The longsword's main system of the spirit gauge being upgraded depending on whether you can get these perfect counters or not is absolutely one of the best playstyles for the majority of players out there. At the highest level, this weapon truly dances with the monster, with the counters and getting the extremely strong damage on some of these attacks, but these attacks also move you through the monster and have a ton of mobility and movement options on them. Throughout this weapon guide, I'm going to take you through the training area. I'm going to show you everything that the longsword has to offer, but I'm also going to teach you the ins and outs of the spirit gauge, as well as some of the best damage that you can pull off with the longsword. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please consider it. I'm on my way to a huge goal of 100,000 subscribers, but you also get notified of any guide content that I put out, as I plan to make a weapon guide for every single weapon in Monster Hunter Wilds, but I also plan to teach you everything that Monster Hunter Wilds has to offer in general. But without further ado, let's hop into the training area. Before we get into combos with the longsword, let's talk about the spirit gauge. The spirit gauge is the meter that you see below the sharpness meter in the top left. The spirit meter is filled by doing typical attacks with the longsword, consisting of the triangle or Y button, or the circle or B button. The spirit gauge is expended by doing certain attacks with the longsword, and landing certain attacks with it will also upgrade the spirit gauge as well. Now we're at a white level of the spirit gauge. There are 3 different level ups to the spirit gauge. There's a white border around the spirit gauge right now, which is the first level. Level 2 turns the spirit gauge yellow. The third and final level is a red buff to our spirit gauge. The spirit gauge works to get us extra damage on our attacks, the white buff being a damage increase, yellow further bolstering that damage increase, and the red finally bolsters our damage even further, but also changes the property of some of the attacks that we have. That's about as simple as the spirit gauge goes in terms of basic details. Now let's talk about the typical combos you can pull off with the longsword. Our first combo is the overhead slash combo into a crescent slash, which can be continued indefinitely. Our next combo is the B or the circle button. For a thrust, that also goes into a rising slash. This can also be continued indefinitely. Furthermore, you can mix these combos together if you want to. Doing the overhead slash when staying in a neutral position doesn't move your hunter. However, if you move in a direction, you'll actually get a little bit of a step with the attack. Now if we press the triangle and circle button together, or Y and B, we get a fade slash as well. The fade slash can be done in different directions, depending on whether you're holding focus mode down or not, or in the middle of a combo. If you hold the stick left or right during a combo, you'll move to the left. And of course, like I said, this can be done by using focus mode and not in the middle of an attack. The fade slash is a great move to deal some damage, but also get some distance for your hunter. In the top right, you can see we can also press the right trigger and the triangle or the Y button to get a spirit thrust. Our longsword not being buffed, however, with the white, the yellow, or the red buff to our spirit gauge doesn't really get us much on this attack. This attack is going to come in handy later. Now let's talk about the spirit blade combo, which expends the meter that we build with our spirit gauge. Pressing the right trigger over and over again will get us the combo. However, we can't follow it up if we don't have any meter. We can get the first attack in it. So let's show it off with some meter now after doing some typical combos. Our meter's not completely full, but it should be enough to get the whole combo. As I said before, pressing the right trigger over and over again will get you the combo. The fourth follow-up to this is the spirit round slash. Landing the spirit round slash is what upgrades our spirit meter. As I talked about before, the white buff is a little bit of a damage increase to all of our attacks, but everything pretty much stays the same in terms of our attacks with the longsword. So from here, it's a case of getting our yellow gauge again. And therefore, I'm going to show some stuff that the Spirit Blade combo can also do. Spirit Blade combo can also be moved to the left or the right as well. Only on the first 2 attacks of the Spirit Blade combo can that be done. Now let's talk about some other uses of the Spirit Blade combo as well. Out of the Sheathe state, if we press the triangle or the Y button, we'll get an overhead slash. However, we can also press the right trigger immediately to start our Spirit Blade combo. Next, let's talk about another teeny little shortcut into the Spirit Blade combo. We talked about the Fade Slash before being a pretty good move, but it can also be followed up with the Spirit Blade, lending to its own attack, which gets us the Spirit Step Slash. which goes straight into the Spirit Blade 3, and finally into the Spirit Round Slash, if we have enough meter. So unlike the typical Spirit Blade combo, with the first 2 steps of it, we actually skip the first 2 steps to go straight into this much faster. Very important. The Spirit Blade combo actually has a special property as well. If we start holding down the right trigger, our Spirit Gauge will start rejuvenating automatically, but we'll also skip a lot of the attacks in the middle of the combo process. Notice our gauge in the top left as we do this. There are a few different levels to the Spirit Charge. The few different levels are as follows. Whenever you see flashes, that's actually an upgrade on the Spirit Blade combo process that we do. So if we let go of it early, on a level 1 flash, we'll get the Spirit Blade attack 2. If we wait for another flash after that, we'll get the Spirit Blade 3. And finally, the final flash of the Spirit Charge will get us actually straight into the Round Slash. Another property of the Spirit Blade combo is that it has the inherent skill Mind's Eye, and if you don't know in Monster Hunter, Mind's Eye allows your attacks to not deflect off of tough monster hide. However, you will notice that our triangle attacks do bounce off, so it's only the Spirit Blade combo. Before we get on to the red buff with longsword combos, I'd actually like to talk about a couple special moves that the longsword has, one being a stance and one being a counter attack. First, let's talk about the stance of the longsword, known as the special sheath. In the top right of the button move list, during any combo, we can press the right trigger and the X or the A button, depending on your controller, to enter the special sheath state. Hunter will stay here for a little while, but will cancel it automatically if you don't press a button. Out of the special sheath state, we have a few different options. Pressing the triangle or Y button will get us in the Eye Slash. The Eye Slash gives us a limited time buff. Notice our Spirit Gauge meter is automatically refilling. This is the property of the Eye Slash. Hitting with either of the 2 attacks from this will get us that limited time buff that actually starts replenishing our Spirit Gauge for us. The other attack in the special sheath is known as the EI Spirit Slash, which does deal some damage on its own, but this actually has some special properties that we need to talk about. If you time the EI Spirit Slash properly, you'll upgrade your Spirit Gauge meter for free. And now you see we're at the yellow buff. The EI Spirit Slash can also be followed up with a few different attacks as well, like the Spirit Blade 3 to go into the Spirit Round Slash. You can also go into a Spirit Thrust out of it, but we're going to show the Spirit Thrust off a little bit later, as I said before. Now that's as simple as the Spirit Sheath goes. You can do it out of a lot of attacks with the longsword. You can even do it out of something like the Fade Slash. You can even do it out of once a special Spirit Sheath EI Slash. Now let's talk about the Foresight Slash. The Foresight Slash is an attack that can be done out of any combo with the longsword by pressing the right trigger and the circle or the B button. Your hunter will fly back a distance and counter attack. This move also has some special counter properties as well. If you time it at the proper time, and you hit with the Foresight Slash, you can go into the Spirit Round Slash to instantly upgrade your meter as well. This acts as a nice counter attack for the longsword. But you don't have to go into the Round Slash as well. You can do a myriad of options in the top right, as you can see. Now those are both of the counter and the stance options with the longsword. Let's finally get on to talking about our red buff and our red state, and how to actually pull off some new attacks that we get when we're only in the red buff state of our Spirit Gauge. Now that we have the red buff to our Spirit Gauge, let's talk about our combo attack properties that have changed. First off, of course, our damage is amplified even further. However, our triangle or B button attacks actually got upgraded into Crimson Slashes, which deal extra attacks on top of the attacks that you already know. Pressing the B or circle button combo, however, does remain the same with the thrust and the rising slash. Our Foresight Slash has also been upgraded into a Foresight Whirl Slash. And finally, our Spirit Blade combo actually has an extra attack follow-up after the Spirit Round Slash, known as the Spinning Crimson Slash. Now, as I may have mentioned before, the red buff does constantly dwindle on your Spirit Gauge the longer you're in this mode. However, this is obviously some of the best damage that you can do with the longsword, as it is the final buff to the Spirit Gauge, especially as all of our attack combos have been enhanced and increased. We're going to talk about how to best utilize this gauge in a little bit, but first let's go over the final moves of the longsword. First off, let's talk about the Spirit Helm Breaker, which we did gloss over a little bit before. If we don't have any kind of buff to our Spirit Gauge, the Spirit Helm Breaker doesn't deal anything. When it hits a monster, it'll literally just fall flat. However, if we do land an attack, we can go into attack known as the Spirit Helm Breaker, which does consume one color of our Spirit Gauge. Pressing the triangle or Y button, or the R2 button, will get us this attack. Therefore, if we also do the Spirit Thrust in the yellow gauge, because it consumes one color, it just means that we go down to the white gauge from there as well. Now there is something to note about the Spirit Helm Breaker. You can cancel out of the Spirit Helm Breaker while you're midair by pressing the R1 or the square or the X button, depending on the controller you use with Xbox or PlayStation. This is good for when a monster moves away, and you don't actually want to consume the gauge if you can't land your attack. Finally, let's talk about the final move that we have after the Spirit Helm Breaker, only accessible to us when we're in the red buff of our Spirit Gauge. Our Spirit Helm Breaker does a lot more damage in the red gauge, but following it up with the press of the right trigger afterwards will also get us the Spirit Release Slash, Longsword's strongest attack. The Spirit Release Slash actually put us down to a white gauge as well. Because the Spirit Helm Breaker takes one gauge off of our Spirit meter, the Spirit Release Slash also takes away one color buff as well. So watching it in action one more time, you'll notice that both of these attacks take one color buff away from us. The Spirit Release Slash does fully fill our Spirit Gauge in the middle, however. Now let's talk about a special property that the Spirit Release Slash also has. The Spirit Release Slash can be delayed a little bit, and you might want to do that because it actually has some armor frames on it as well. We didn't actually take damage from that huge smash attack, which does normally send our hunter flying. Now let's talk about focus mode with the longsword. Firstly, focus mode is pretty important for aiming our longsword attacks whenever we're doing our Spirit Blade combo, as we can move around while we do this combo. Talking about Longsword's Focus Strike, the Longsword's Focus Strike actually has the ability to get us a level up to our Spirit Gauge. Since we're in the white buff, you'll notice that we go to a yellow buff whenever we land a Focus Strike. You'll also notice that if we can break 2 wounds at the same time with the Longsword, we'll get 2 level ups to our Spirit Gauge. Putting us in red mode automatically. Focus mode can also be greatly utilized if you happen to land your Spirit Thrust but you need to change a direction in the air. Focus mode is also a great way of doing that. Now that covers all the attacks that we have with Longsword. Let's talk about sliding and jumps now. Out of a slide with the Longsword, you can press the triangle or the Y button to get a jumping Rising Slash, which can be followed up with all of our normal attacks. We can also press the right trigger to get a new attack known as the Aerial Spirit Blade Draw, which does get us straight into the Spirit Round Slash actually. Now talking about jumps with the Longsword, pressing the triangle or the Y button out of a sheath will get you the Jumping Slash. The same also remains in an unsheathed state. But pressing the right trigger gets you a Jumping Spirit Blade combo that is actually upgraded depending on the color buff that you had. Let's talk about them all in order. First off, pressing the right trigger with no color buff gets you a Jumping Spirit Blade, and that's about it. Out of any of these attacks with any buff, you can hold down the right trigger after that initial Jumping Spirit Blade to go straight into the Spirit Charge if you'd like to. The white buff upgrades our Spirit Blade to do the Spirit Blade 2 for 2 attacks. The yellow buff is still the same, but we do get more damage because it is the yellow buff. And finally, as you may have guessed it, the red buff does get us the Spirit Blade 3 with 3 attacks, meaning we can go straight into a Spirit Blade 3 on the ground and into the Spirit Round Slash. Now that's basically as simple as Longsword gets in terms of all of its attacks and all of its attack combos and its counters as well as using the Spirit Gauge. Let's talk about some of the best damage with Longsword, or some of the best strategies to employ when you're fighting monsters. First off, some of the best damage that you can do with the Longsword is by doing the Spirit Thrust into the Spirit Release Slash. However, this does put us down to a white buff, meaning we need to get our red buff back over and over to get this damage. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but using your red buff, especially because it does slowly dwindle on its own, is extremely important for getting these crimson slashes. But don't forget, we can also move around with our Spirit Blade combo as well to get also great damage. I feel like the Longsword's playstyle in this game is all about utilizing this red buff while you have it, but only finally ending before the red buff is technically gone to get the Spirit Helm Breaker for the most value. It's not almost gone right here, But you get the idea. It's an extremely consistent playstyle that'll really help you out the longsword, especially if you're a beginner. But if you do want to spam the Spirit Helm Breaker and the Spirit Release Slash, let's talk about some of the fastest ways to get your red buff. The fastest way to get your gauge fully maximized is by doing 2 overhead slashes into a fade slash. You'll notice our gauge completely fills from this by pressing triangle and triangle, or Y and Y over and over, and pressing the combination of the buttons of triangle and Y or YB to get the fade slash. Look at our spirit gauge now. And because we know we can go into the Spirit Blade combo from the fade slash, this just made it much easier to get into the combo, as a kind of a shortcut into Spirit Blade 3, and finally into the Spirit Round Slash. But something I haven't talked about as well is after any Spirit Round Slash, we can go into the special Sheathe, which means we can go straight into something like the Eye Slash. You can go into the special Sheathe stance as well to potentially get a free Eye Spirit Slash as well. So Longsword is all about being able to do these counters to get up to your red meter. As you saw, I was able to get up to red meter just like that because of a monster's incoming attack. If you're really good at doing this, you can get up to a red gauge buff in no time. And of course, we can go into the Spirit Thrust, into the Helm Breaker, and into the Full Release Slash. But of course, I said this is contingent on you being good with the longsword and getting these counters. So as I stated before, it's good to spam the Spirit Helm Breaker into the Spirit Release Slash. If you're really good at getting your counters with the longsword, to get your buffs back immediately. However, if you're not very good at that, and you're a beginner with the longsword, I highly suggest that you actually just stick to using your red gauge for all of its special properties. Since the red gauge does dwindle automatically, it's best to use your Crimson Slash attacks, and also your stronger upgraded Spirit Blade combo as well, which does get you the spinning Crimson Slash. It's best to stay in this mode as long as possible, or at least it's very recommended. Unless you're a pro at getting your red gauge back immediately after spending the Spirit Helm Breaker and the Spirit Release Slash, it's kinda tough to actually manage the red gauge if you don't use it at all. It's best to do your Spirit Helm Breaker near the end of the red gauge before it finally wears off. Finally, some early game longswords that I'd recommend is something like the Rumpumpolo tree. The Rumpumpolo tree comes with the skill Power Prolonger. Power Prolonger states that it allows longswords as well as many other weapons to stay powered up longer. So your longsword color buffs will remain a lot longer, so if you have trouble getting up to your red buff with the longsword, if you're a new player or you just have trouble in general, Power Prolonger makes it so that you can stay in your buffs a lot longer. However, talking about some skills you can also get with Longsword that'll greatly benefit you no matter what stage of the game that you're at is the skill Quick Sheath, which first does come on the Balahara armor. Quick Sheath speeds up your weapon sheathing, and this does indeed speed up how fast you are with your special sheath as well. Now that we're at the end of the video, I need to tell you the truth about how I feel about the Longsword. I think that the Longsword is actually one of the best weapons ever introduced in the Monster Hunter series, but action RPGs as a whole. Now I say that for a few weapons in Monster Hunter like the Charge Blade or the Insect Glaive, but the Longsword truly is something special. Being able to be picked up by nearly anybody as a beginner weapon, but having such an insanely high skill level does truly make this weapon one of the best weapons to use. It's no wonder why the Longsword is the most popular weapon in Monster Hunter. This thing just appeals to such a wide audience, and I think that there's a lot of players who don't want to play the Longsword because they don't want to be a part of some bandwagon. But the truth is this weapon is super flashy, super cool, strong damage, and strong counter attacks. The long range and the dance-like play, and being able to be picked up by players of any skill level is truly remarkable. So I think in this weapon guide, what I'd truly like to state once and for all is that I'm pretty bad with the Longsword, and I do make a lot of typical jokes about this weapon in my live streams usually, talking about how I sucks, but the truth is I'm just not crazy good with this thing like some of the speedrunners out there. However, it does remain that this weapon can still be played at a pretty expert level just by doing some of the most basic stuff, and that's why I think I truly love the Longsword in Monster Hunter. But that's gonna do it for today's video, guys and gals. Now that we're at the end of this video, do you think the Longsword is an easy weapon to pick up? Do you agree with me that it does have a pretty high skill ceiling? And do you think this weapon deserves all the hate it gets from the community for being the most popular weapon? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider it. I'm on my way to a huge goal of 100,000 subscribers, and every little bit helps. But I also put out tons of Monster Hunter Wild guides teaching you everything you need to know about the game. But you'll also be notified of any live streams that I do, as I stream to both YouTube and Twitch, as I'm a multi-streamer. But that's gonna do it for today's video, guys and gals. Terra Knights, I hope you had a good one. This has been Terroriza, and I'll catch y'all in the next video. Peace!